Okay. Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, September 7th, 2021, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission is now called to order. For the record, I am Chairman Jason Welker, presiding in council chambers at Sandpoint City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street in Sandpoint, Idaho. Also present are Commissioners John Hastings, Kate Weisman, Mo Dunkel, and Tom Riggs is joining us via Zoom. Forrest Shuck may or may not be here. We do not know. And absent this evening is Slate Camp. First, we'll start with announcements. Are there any general announcements or reports from the commissioners or from staff tonight? No. Okay. Then we'll move on. The next agenda item is to approve the meeting minutes from the commission's last meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the August 17th, 2021 meeting.
So moved.
Want to amend, I think the roll call doesn't indicate that Forrest Shuck was here, but he appeared to have moved to approve the minutes from that meeting. Does he need to be added to the list of commissioners who are present?
Forrest was here, yeah. So
if that is an omission, then by all means.
yeah, so I hear a motion to amend the minutes to add Forrest Shuck to the minutes from our August 17th meeting.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Clerk, I assume you can handle that? Yeah.
We have a second to
Yes,
approve
we
the minutes
did.
as amended.
Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Good
Passes.
catch.
And with that amendment, can we have a motion to approve those minutes?
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Those minutes are approved. There is no old business on the agenda tonight, so we will move on to new business. And first on our agenda for new business is a recommendation to City Council on preliminary approval of the proposed Madison Meadows subdivision. Pursuant to Sandpoint City Code 10-1-8, prior to a recommendation decision, the commission will take public testimony. The order and procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. 1, explanation of the subject of the public hearing by city staff. 2, presentation by the applicant. Please note that commissioners should address their questions to the applicant at this time. 3, opening of the public hearing, at which time the public may provide testimony. Questions should be asked of those testifying at that time. The order for those providing testimony will be as follows. A, in favor, B, neutral, and C, opposed. 4, the applicant's rebuttal testimony, at which time final questions may be asked of the applicant. Please note that if new facts are elicited during rebuttal, the public will be given the opportunity to comment on any new facts. 5, will close the public hearing, and 6, the commission will deliberate. No new information may be provided after the hearing has been closed, with questions directed to city staff only during deliberation. Before we proceed any further, I would like to ask for confirmation from each commissioner, please, that you have had no ex parte contact or conflict of interest as pertains to this. Microphone just went off. It's back on. As pertains to this request. So we'll start with Kate.
I've had none.
Okay, I've had none.
I've had none.
None.
And Tom?
None.
Okay, great. We will now hear from city staff who will introduce this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome, by the way, to Sandpoint, Tess.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here. Okay, let's see. Okay, this evening we're here to hear the Atlas Development Subdivision Preliminary Plat. Applicant is Atlas Development LLC. The representative this evening is Anthony Burrell from Veritas. And I know you've seen this diagram before. Subdivisions are a combination of comprehensive planning, zoning and subdivision codes, as well as transportation plans. And where they meet in the middle is where we have approval for new subdivisions in our city. The procedures for subdivisions quick overview for you. Preliminary plat stage is where we're at. This is where we overview the general compliance with applicable requirements, including zoning under Title 19, subdivision code under Title 10, related plans, such as the comprehensive plan, the multimodal transportation plan, and the urban transportation plans. And we look at adequate provisions for infrastructure and services, including any offsite requirements. After the stage of preliminary plat, what happens after tonight, if we move this project forward? The project proponents will develop the infrastructure as constructed in their proposed plans. And then once that is complete, then they'll come back with final plat. We'll overview again for substantial compliance with preliminary plat conditions, the required public infrastructures, resulting in the lots available for water, sewer, or served by our water, sewer, emergency responses, and so forth. Once the plat is recorded, then the property lines are put in place and building permits may be issued as property is sold. Tonight, the subdivision looks a little bit like this. It is a proposal to subdivide approximately 1.79 acres into 7 buildable single-family lots, including 1 flagpole lot and 1 unbuildable stormwater tract. The lot sizes as proposed range in between 5,000 square feet and 7,900 square feet. And the zoning for this designation is residential multifamily. Vicinity map for your overview of whereabouts this is located. Madison Avenue is towards the western portion of the city limits. You can see just north of Cedar Street. And I apologize. There has been amendment to the record. The packet omitted 3 important documents that I want to bring to your attention tonight have been added to the packet. You can access those through the links on the website. The public notice posting, the public notice hearing document, as well as the affidavit of posting. Those are omitted in the original packet and they've now been added. But they were included in the staff report. Okay, so to overview the 3 circles in the Venn diagram, comprehensive planning. This site is designated context area 3. What context area 3 says for our goals for the future is that, and I'm going to skip down to the bottom because that's the important part. Smaller lots, smaller setbacks, but for limited residential uses only. The bulk mass and our architecture of multifamily and single-family units should seamlessly integrate with one another, encouraging a balanced streetscape where no one structure or development dominates. So this is a single-family residential development with smaller lots and fits into the comprehensive plan designation for this area. Next is a quick overview of subdivision code and zoning. And in the staff report, you'll find a table that goes through the subdivision code requirements, such as, does it meet 60 foot wide minimum right of way for local streets? It does. Does it conform with the transportation plan? It does. Is there right of way adjoining undeveloped property? Yes. A 16-foot alleyway is not applicable. It does meet the block length requirements of 330 feet or at 330 feet. Street arrangement, public utilities, and curb corners and so forth, traffic analysis.
Tess, can I ask a quick question? Where is that 330 feet measured from?
That is from street to street for
Is
the
that
the
from,
width.
from
of the floor.
Cedar or from Madison, or do you know? If we go back a slide or two
So from,
from Cedar Street, that's Cedar Street there.
that's a good question. Dan, I apologize.
Yeah, in this case, the block length is measured along the new street.
Oh,
The distance between intersections is also cited in the staff report in a separate section.
is that 300 feet as well?
It is more in the 250 range. I'm sure I can dig it up, but
273 and 224, I believe, are the approximate distances from.
Okay, thanks, Tess.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Dan. The zoning designation is residential multifamily, which requires a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet. All of the lots have or will meet this requirement. An overview of the subdivision plat map. Again, for your review. And a quick overview. I apologize, it feels like. These are out of order. They are, I'm not sure why it's not showing them all in that. Skip it. I apologize. For some reason, it is skipping every other slide. Just hitting the next
Bridge
slide. So
version.
that's what I was thrown off. So your packet materials, I'm going to kind of go back and add in here for you. And I apologize that it'll be in not view mode, but I think we can see it well enough. Included in your packet materials is the staff report analysis with complete application and showing substantial compliance with city code standards and adoptive comprehensive material or comprehensive plan materials. And attached with the staff report are the following documents for your review: the subdivision application, narrative, preliminary plat, preliminary improvement plans, strip generation, required public notices, which we've amended, and written comments. And that's where I was supposed to introduce you to the amendment to the packet. The overview of how it meets comprehensive plan, how it meets the transportation plans. Comprehensive plan refers to the preference of traditional grid street patterns and the charm of neighborhoods with block lengths. And again, we've discussed how it meets these block lengths. Zoning code and subdivision code also addresses those and specifies 150-foot intersection. And here's the numbers. The intersections are 234 and 270. And the multimodal master plan, as well as the urban area transportation plan, also specifies intersection spacing of 250. So the majority of these are met, as they're all met, and the discussion is available in your plan, your packet. Subdivisions. And again, I apologize, I'm not sure why it's skipping around. Zoning, okay. We've gone over the 3 Venn diagrams. Showed you the overall plat again. So important part of this packet is our public comments. And I have a comment matrix here for your review. All of the comments that have been received to date, starting with our comment in support of. And their comments were conditional support and road repairs. They're conditionally in support of this project with road repairs and improvements, and they are concerned with traffic levels in the area. but they are in general support of. There was no specific issue, and the position was neutral from Northern Lights. If no lot is landlocked, then there are no concerns. There was no position provided from the Independent Highway District. They're okay with this project as long as structures are single-family residences only. The position is neutral. They're opposed to two-story homes, and they're concerned with dust control and stormwater efforts. Also neutral position. No two-story homes, stormwater concerns, and 15-foot setbacks. Also no position. No issue was provided, but a does not support position was offered. We have a concern with infrastructure of the infrastructure load of 2 new residences in the small town reputation of Sandpoint, as well as affordable housing services for affordable housing for our service workers. This commenter also does not support. And another concern with responsible growth and infrastructure needs, as well as affordable housing with a do not support. Those comments have all been added for your to your packet for reference. Draft conditions of special note in addition to our normal standard subdivision conditions, which I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with. The specific ones for this subdivision that were added include all lots, including lot 10, shall be 5,000 square feet or greater. No additional right-of-way is required along Madison. The existing 60-foot right-of-way is acceptable. Maintenance of proposed stormwater swales shall be the responsibility of homeowners. Lot 5 may require a driveway in compliance, which is the flagpole lot, with International Fire Code 503, if the distance from the street to the rear exterior of the wall is greater than 150 feet. And all final street, stormwater, and utility layout and design details are subject to detailed engineering plan review at the time of the final plat and building permit. So the remainder of the procedure this evening for this project is to hear a presentation by the applicants, where the commission members may address questions directly to the applicant. Open the hearing for public testimony. And in the order as follows: in favor, neutral, and opposed. We'll allow rebuttal testimony from the applicant after the public testimony. We'll close the public hearing, and then the commissioners will debate on the topics. No new information at this time, only questions directed to city staff. But this time, if we want to invite the applicant.
First, I'll see if there's any questions for Tess from commissioners.
I have a question. Tess, you indicated on slide 9, I'm getting your presentation mixed up with mine here, where there it is, thank you. The comp plan has a preference for traditional grid street pattern. This one does not have the grid street pattern. It is our 3rd one in a row with a cul-de-sac. You made an argument, I'm not sure you personally, but in the staff report on page 9, there was an argument for why the grid did not work in this case. Could you enlarge upon that, or is that something it would be better to ask of the applicant?
Let's look at, there's a lot of what I call legacy lots, right, that have not been subject to the traditional original city plotting and grid pattern and design. And so really that's what we're left with, is a lot of those odd and unique shaped lots with development that has happened and occurred all around it prior to any preferences and regulations that prefer that. So in this particular circumstance, the original and the previously the original grid pattern you can see is around, but there's a very odd shaped development pattern that surrounds this particular lot on the block. And with these properties, the way that they were laid out, there's absolutely no way to add a through street through from the block in either direction. So because it's just an oddly unique inlayment of the entire block, we're really only forced with a cul-de-sac in this particular circumstance.
Yeah, it looks like no rights of way were reserved between those houses on Cedar Street and Nicholas Way, so.
There's no dedications, correct?
Okay, thank you. I think that's all for the moment. Thank you.
Could you clarify a little, go back, if you could go back to slide 9, the same slide again. There was a little confusion about the urban area transportation plans requirement of intersection spacing of 250 feet versus the 150 feet for local streets. And I understand this, you said this was about 270 feet. I assume that's from Madison and 234 feet from Cedar. Is that correct? The turn into the cul-de-sac.
Let me double check that.
It looks like it's a little bit closer to Cedar.
I believe you're correct.
Clearly Nicholas Way on the other side is like much closer to Cedar. I understood city code to say the city blocks had to be between 300 and 600 feet. How did these developments, and how is this development getting away with having blocks of less than 300 feet? Isn't 300 to 600 feet in our code is the required block lengths?
Yeah, I think we've got two different issues. One is the intersection spacing, and to Tessa's point,
Block lengths
kind of
versus
the
intersection spacing.
yes,
Okay.
and to Tessa's point, we're kind of left with a lot of these remnant parcels, and it becomes challenging to try to fit within the confines of the urban area transportation plan, multimodal plan, city code. With this particular provision, there actually is a bit of a discrepancy between the urban area transportation plan guidelines that specify 250-foot spacing and code, which actually allows for 150 intersection spacing on a local street. And we've typically accommodated the code provision, so the less restrictive provision. In this case, they're showing 234-foot intersection spacing on the most, or the closest, I guess, intersection. And that certainly exceeds the 150, but does not meet the 250 identified in the urban area transportation plan. So
Okay.
that's what I think this was noting.
Okay, I understand. There were some comments from received via email about, and of course, we heard this with the previous development on Cedar Street that's been approved. Obviously, we always talk about the cumulative effect of these new developments, and any individual development may not warrant a full trip report. But when you add this to the 27 homes on Nicholas and Moss Hart and the 20 or so units that are going to be built just one block further west on Cedar Street in the next year in that apartment building, we're talking about now, 57 new residences right along Cedar Street. And anybody who's driven Cedar Street there knows it's one of the worst maintained streets in Sandpoint. It's also where the library is. Avista uses it often to get to their facility around the corner. So it gets a lot of heavy vehicles. It has no sidewalks, no curbs, just old swales on the sides. I'm wondering if there's any ability for the city to step up and invest in that street, knowing how much new development is going in along that street right now and has gone in the last 2 years. I don't know if that's a question for you, Dan.
Yeah, and I can't really speak to council budget decisions. As of right now, that section of street is not included in the next fiscal year's budget. We have allocations for other streets in other areas. If additional funding were to be available, that could possibly be another priority street for reconstruction, but at this time, it's not on the plan.
Are there any other questions from staff? Tom, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
John, Mo? No? Okay, next will be the applicant's presentation. As a reminder, commissioners should address their questions to the applicant at this time. Come on up.
Hi there.
Hi.
My name is Anthony Bowerly. Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners, for hearing this case. And thank you, Tess, for the presentation. It was very thorough. For brevity, I'm not going to really touch on too many things that Tess spoke to. Just kind of want to highlight our intent to meeting the regulating guidelines and the guiding documents that the city of Sandpoint has put forward, such as the comprehensive plan, zoning ordinances, the MTMP, as well as the UATP regarding traffic. I think she did a good job of going through those. So I guess as she listed those in the staffing report were generally favorable and pretty conformative. Wanted to touch on a couple things. Stormwater for one of them. I know that the design engineer on the site has discussed, I believe, thoroughly with Dan about some concerns. And of course, come final plat, there will be an extensive design for managing the stormwater. I believe a stormwater management plan is required, and that of course will be completed. Additionally, during construction, BMPs of course will be installed. There will be a SWIP and a construction general permit through the DEQ. Those are required for this type of construction and land disturbance. At this point, I have been identified as the SWIP inspector. So if anybody has any questions during construction, they can call me. I believe my information's on the application. So feel free at any time to reach out and call me. I can answer those questions. Yeah, additionally, we've seen all the conditions on the reports. We don't have any issues and concerns with those. I think everything is more in lines of what we were thinking and what we were planning on accomplishing. Yeah, again, thank you for hearing this case. Yeah, again, to be brief, I'm happy to answer any questions and comments that you guys have.
You clarify, do you work for Atlas Development or are you? an agent
No,
of theirs?
apologies. I work for Veritas Engineer and Training for Veritas, and then the lead planner on this project.
Okay.
I have a question. I don't remember where. I saw it somewhere that it had mentioned that I think it was in one of the proposed conditions, perhaps, that individual lot owners would be responsible for stormwater swales. Do we know which lot? I know it's preliminary, but do we know what lots would require that, and what would be the enforcement for homeowner maintenance?
Yeah, I can't attest to exactly what that would be. The CCNRs haven't been written yet, but there is a tract dedicated to the collection and treatment of stormwater. So I imagine everything would be directed that way. And then once the CCNRs are established, that would be decided at that time.
There was a concern from a neighbor about, maybe you can speak to this, and I don't know if there's anything to be done about it, but privacy concerns with the relatively small lot sizes and the, limited setback. Can you just, I don't know if you're to the stage yet, but can you just describe the style of home that is being developed for this property? Are these going to be two-story homes?
I can't answer that yet. Again, CCNRs haven't been written, which would kind of determine square footage and height and how many stories and that sort of thing. Best we can say is single development at this point, or single family residence homes.
Will Atlas be building the homes and selling them, or is it a bring your own builder type development?
I believe Atlas is going to search for a local developer to do that, but I don't know exactly.
Okay. You're not to that stage yet.
Not yet, no.
Okay.
I can comment that there is a 15-foot minimum setback requirement on the rear lot.
Right. Other questions for the engineer? None? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now prepare to proceed with the public hearing. Please note for the record, any written comments submitted prior to agenda posting was included with the meeting packet. Any written comment received after agenda posting but prior to the meeting was forwarded and provided to the commissioners. The public hearing is for comments only. Do not address any questions to the commissioners or to city staff. If commissioners have questions for the person testifying, they should ask those questions at the time of their testimony. For those in attendance here in chambers this evening, if you would like to speak, you'll need to complete a sign-up form available on the table by the door and hand it to the city clerk. Please state on your form whatever you wish to speak in, whether you wish to speak in favor, are neutral, or are in opposition to the application. Do not approach the dais. If you have any written materials for the commissioners, please hand those to the city clerk. And if there's anybody participating on Zoom, please note that you will need a working microphone on your phone or computer to speak. When your name is called, you will see a prompt on your screen asking whether you would like to unmute, then you will need to unmute yourself in order to be heard. The clerk will now lower all hands on Zoom in order to take testimony in the order previously stated. If you wish to speak in favor, are neutral, or are in opposition, I will make a call for each. Then you may raise your hand at that time. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. The public hearing is now open. Is there anybody in the chambers or on Zoom who would like to speak in favor of this proposal? Yes. Please come on up.
I'll speak in favor. My name is Sandy Young. I'm the president and principal planner at Veritas. And Anthony did a great job of presenting the subdivision to you. We're still at the very preliminary stage, so we haven't hammered down or honed into what types of homes will be here. I do want to just briefly discuss the stormwater. I was Kootenai County Stormwater Coordinator and engineer without being a real engineer licensed for 10 years. And so stormwater is near and dear to my heart. We've taken a lot of great pains to make sure that this complies, of course, with the city's regulations for stormwater, but that also to ensure all stormwater on site will be treated as it should be with swales, and that any runoff from the site will, the peak rate won't exceed what the city's mandated. So there can be runoff, but the way the code reads is that it has to be, there can't be an increase in the peak rate of runoff. So we will comply with all those and of course work closely with the city engineer. We have an engineer here with us who designed that stormwater plan. And if you have any questions, he is here to answer those. But just want to assure you that we've read through the conditions of approval. We're fine with all of them. If you feel the need to add any to those, we're happy to do what we need to do to make this compliant. With regard to the commissioner's statement about this really being kind of an odd fit, for us as planners, this is a perfect example of infill development in a city. So rather than seeing sprawl, we're seeing infill that's used to the best of its ability in complying with code, but yet meeting the housing needs. So that's all I have. And I might reserve time for rebuttal if there's anything I feel I can address.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak in favor? Is there anybody who would like to speak in neutral? Sure, come on up. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Helen Gates. I'm a Sandpoint City resident. I live on Nicholas Way. We've heard quite a lot of sort of abstract concerns about stormwater, and I'd like to provide a little bit more context for that. But when the subdivision on Mosshart went in, first of all, the developers did almost nothing for erosion control during the process of development. And even now, most of the homes, many of the homes, I should say, still don't have yards. So all of the runoff from that neighborhood is a mixture of water that's been treated properly and also silt. Now, the problem with that is that all of the runoff flows into the drainage feature on 1525 Nicholas Way, which is the empty lot directly north of my house. And that is all of the houses on Mosshart and most of the houses on Poplar that went in as a part of that project, which means that essentially 2 whole neighborhoods are flowing into my backyard. as you might imagine, that poses a bit of a problem. Looking at the proposed plat map that was included with the packet for this meeting, it looks to me as though lots 1 through 7 can only flow in a swale along the north part of that subdivision into the existing drainage feature, adding a third subdivision onto the drainage load for the drainage feature right next to my house, which is at least my specific concern. I can't speak to anybody else who raised stormwater runoff as a concern of theirs, but I would urge the people in charge of developing the detailed stormwater drainage plan to consider someplace else for drainage for at least the majority of that neighborhood, or at least come up with a way of mitigating the additional load that's being placed on that poor drainage feature.
Yeah.
It's already fairly full of silt and the water backs up pretty far into my backyard on a good rain. I also wanted to offer a comment on the infrastructure load with all of the new houses coming in. The intersection of Cedar and Division, I think, would make a great candidate for a 4-way stop. There's quite a bit of traffic to the high school on Division. There's quite a bit of traffic now on Cedar trying to cross Division to get from the neighborhoods to work, me included. Given how much of an impact, a positive impact, the 4-way stop at Pine Street made, and given the relative distance from Pine Street, I think that Cedar and Division would make another excellent traffic control feature on that road.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would like to speak neutral? Is there nobody on Zoom?
Mr. Chairman, there are some attending on Zoom. No one has raised their hand to speak yet.
Okay, thank you. All right, is there anybody who would like to speak in opposition to this proposal? Please come to the dais if so. Anybody on Zoom?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to speak at all on this proposal? Okay.
Yeah, once.
Oh, we do have one. Yeah, come on up. Thank you.
My name is Scott Brown. I'm with James A. Sewell and Associates here in Sandpoint. And we provided some preliminary engineering on this project as far as the infrastructure, and did also look into the stormwater runoff issues out there in this area. And I concur, there are some issues, I would have to guess, along the north side of this project, and also with the water which drains from that point along the east side of the project. The existing lay of the land right now on this particular property sheet flows water in a southwesterly direction away from both those areas. And our final design intends to keep that same pattern going as well. Water will basically flow into Madison Avenue and then south down through, there's like a 15, 16 foot wide shallow drainage swale that drains from Madison down to Oak. And we intend to detain the water before it gets into that and then, let it flow down to Oak. So we don't have any intention of draining water north into those existing swales nor east. And that's basically the direction we're going in. Before we even started this project, I had extensive discussions about stormwater with Sandpoint City Engineer, Mr. Taddick. And we knew there were issues before coming into this. And we did some preliminary analysis, and the conveyance swales that are in place now are large enough to take on any more stormwater from this whole area. There's about 15 acres in this area that drains into the large swale that runs down to Oak. Are there any questions about stormwater runoff intentions for this project?
Any questions from commissioners? Thank you for that clarification. Okay, before the public hearing is closed, would the applicant care to offer any rebuttal testimony? Okay, thank you. All right, the public hearing is now closed. At this time, the commission will deliberate. No new information may be provided, and questions may be directed only to city staff during deliberation. The staff report includes suggested motions.
I have a couple questions if I could. what is labeled as tract A, that is the area that's being designated for stormwater management with this new development, correct?
Correct.
And is it possible that at this juncture, as this area is developed, the developers could work with city staff to improve the drainage problems that have already been addressed by neighbors?
I think that would be pretty challenging
Would it-
from what I
I
know
don't
of
know the
that
topography that
existing
well to see what's-
system. There is an effort underway. The developer of the property to the north is working with those property owners on a solution for some of their drainage concerns, and that's
But, and
that's
that's being
playing
done
out
totally
now.
independent of this, and your
Absolutely.
opinion, that's the best way to do it at this point.
Yes, to Scott's point, Mr. Brown, we chatted about this. He's done his due diligence here, and he's providing a plan that will send the drainage a different course, so we won't be adding to some of the issues that the properties to the north and the east have experienced here.
Other thoughts from commissioners?
My only concern is the very narrow stretch of Cedar Street. And I think a lot of the homeowners in this new development will probably go towards Cedar for ingress egress. I drive that stretch of Cedar quite often. And there's cars parked on the side of the street, and it's really bumpy right through there. And every time I go through, I think I should have went the other way, but the other ways are not as convenient. They are better, but it is kind of a bottlenecked area where we are building up a lot of new residences, and it's already a problem. So that's it will be more of a problem, I think. So hopefully that can be, I mean, it probably should have been done a long time ago, actually, because it's not like this just popped up today. I remember we talked about this a year ago, and with the kids walking to school, library right there, the city has a massive sports complex just to the west. I mean, it seems like it's out of the area of what this development, it's just barely out of the area, but it's going to be a problem. Really, you guys know how I feel about the grid street pattern. I don't know how you put one in here. The damage is done. The bigger cul-de-sac, I do like that. I think that is a bonus. And we do need places for people to live, and 10 new homes in that area would be a good addition to the area. So hopefully people can get in and out of there. I don't know if there's any way to help traffic go to other areas, but knowing that neighborhood, I grew up on Lincoln, and there isn't really anything easier. So yeah, I also know how big of a project it would be to widen Cedar through there, because there is difficult topography to navigate, and there is a significant amount of stormwater drainage that goes to that very large swale behind Vista, which I don't know where it goes from there. It probably goes to that other one that we did that they filled in. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
I would add to that. I know that when we looked at that prior application for those apartments in the same neighborhood, that I thought we had some, I thought it sounded like city staff was more interested that Cedar Street, and maybe not as a staff thing, maybe it's a city council thing, but that Cedar Street that section was one of the highest priorities for the city. Did that not come up in some of those discussions? Just because of its proximity to churches, schools, parks, library, everything else, and it is so substandard. That's why you said there's a current budget, and this was not a part of that. I thought that it had been stated in the past that that was one of the city's highest priority blocks, or 3 blocks, or whatever it is.
I believe at that time, Tim, you wanted me
Yep.
to address that? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I believe at that time, we were in the midst of completing our detailed pavement assessment. And so it was a bit speculative, so we just were speculating based on the functional class of the roadway and its condition that it would, be a candidate for replacement. And it is a candidate. The condition is certainly poor, but unfortunately our list of streets that need replacement is very long and the dollars are very few at this time. So it's just a balance of that. And our pavement maintenance program prioritizes completing street repairs before we need to completely reconstruct the streets. So sometimes it feels counterintuitive that a street that may be in worse condition isn't being addressed, but we're trying to address one that is maybe in a little bit better condition, but perhaps before it falls into that condition that now it's just a reconstruct. We try to get to that one to kick it up to that 20-year life again, so that we're buying ourselves time essentially, so that the whole system's not crashing at once. If
I would
you're
guess that
following,
I would guess this block is in that completely reconstruct category.
yeah, I would just venture to guess that the pavement condition index is pretty low. And it looks like just from driving it, I drive it frequently as well. There's a lot of apparent clay boils, so there's subgrade issues. So this isn't going to be a grind and just add more asphalt. This is going to be a full section. You got to build a base under it. And there might be some subgrade drainage issues that need to get addressed, some perforated pipe or something to get water away from the subgrade. So yeah, it's not a cheap effort.
I agree that this is a reasonable use for this area, that it isn't a place we can have the grid, and so the cul-de-sac is a good addition. My one concern is just looking at these conditions, if they are sufficient to ensure that stormwater drainage will not be for the properties to the north. Dan, A through U, final street stormwater and utility layout and design details are subject to detailed engineering plan review. Is that sufficient so that the property owners to the north will be protected from any further stormwater incursion?
Yeah, I think condition of approval C addresses the need for a stormwater management plan.
We always say that. So are we just confident that this plan will be sufficient, or does this require that in some way?
Well, and code requires that there's no increase in the peak rate of runoff. So they have to detain water on site so that it's not exacerbating issues or impacts on downstream properties. There's many provisions in stormwater code regarding impacts to downstream properties. And if you read this condition closely, the next sentence is to address some of that, not specific to the neighbors to the north or east, because this is intending to drain to a different system or a different area. But there are concerns downstream. There are, again, swales that flow across private property or existing drainages that go across private property, and we're sensitive to those issues. So we're requiring, and Scott is providing a downstream analysis all the way to where this drainage enters the city system, the pipe system down on Haley Street, just to make sure we're not impacting private properties along the way.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll make some comments here. My concerns aren't so much with the specifics of this development. I think it's as well as you could have used this 1.8 acres and get 10 properties on there. I just can't help but observe that, last year we heard a proposal for a development in this very same neighborhood that's on property just over half the size that has between, I think it was 18 dwelling units on it. And it just sort of pains me to see the last few undeveloped multifamily properties in Sandpoint be subdivided into single family lots, because I don't believe that the homes that end up on these single family lots are meeting our real housing need in Sandpoint, which is for workforce housing. So just an observation that I hope developers take to heart. We have multifamily zoning in Sandpoint. We want to see more multifamily properties. I know the neighbors probably don't like hearing that, but generally speaking, that's really what I think we need in this town. We've seen so many subdivisions like this in the last 2 years, all which ultimately I believe will have very similar 2-car garage, single-family homes on them. So I would have loved to see a multifamily development on this property. That would have made a lot of these other problems a whole lot worse, though. So I understand that single-family is probably the best use given the circumstances. Tom, do you have any comments?
Thank you. This strikes me as a good infill development. It's a challenging site and, you know, you really can't do it without a cul-de-sac. So I like it. I think it's a good infill development, but I certainly share the concerns that other commissioners have expressed about the load on Cedar Street. You know, it's just undeniably a substandard street, and this is going to contribute to the conditions on that street. I don't think you can very well hold this particular developer to do much about that, but I think I guess at a minimum, we need to impress upon the city council that this is a problem and it needs to be addressed because it affects a pretty significant piece of neighborhood, including city properties at the big park to the west, the city library to the east. It's Cedar Street's a heavily used street, so it's not. I don't think it's particularly specific to the approval of this development, but you know that at some point the city just needs to step up and take care of the street. Those are my comments.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, I think we've heard from all the commissioners. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to approve or deny or recommend approval or denial of this application.
I'll make a motion. Let's make sure I've got the right one. Yeah. I move the Planning and Zoning Commission, after consideration of the criteria and relevant standards of Idaho Code and Sandpoint City Code, recommend the Sandpoint City Council approve the request by Atlas Development Incorporated for the Madison Avenue 10-lot proposed subdivision located at 412 and 424 Madison Avenue, parcel ID numbers RPS 3686000040A and RPS 3686000030A, and bounded by private property to the northeast and south, Madison Avenue to the west, subject to the following conditions. Conditions A through U within section 6 of the staff report provided. Based on evidence, records, and testimony, the reasons for approving this request are: 1, staff has followed the notice procedures applicable to subdivisions contained in Sandpoint City Code Title 9, Chapter 9, and 2, based on information presented at the hearing and the placement of limitations through conditions, the application is in compliance with the subdivision and zoning requirements and consistent with the comprehensive plan.
I shall second.
Okay. Seconded by John. I think this will be a roll call.
Commissioner Hughesman,
Aye.
Commissioner Riggs,
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings,
Yes.
Commissioner Welker,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunkel.
Yes.
Okay. The motion passes. All right. We'll move on. The final item of the agenda is a recommendation to City Council on proposed changes to Sandpoint City Code Title 9 zoning. As announced during the commission's last meeting, a public hearing was previously scheduled for August 17th and subsequently postponed to this evening's meeting. In accordance with Idaho Code Section 67-6511, the Planning and Zoning Commission shall analyze proposed changes to zoning ordinances to ensure that they are not in conflict with the policies of the adopted comprehensive plan. After considering the plan and other evidence gathered through the public hearing process, the commission may recommend to City Council the adoption or rejection of the ordinance amendment. This item will be broken up into 2 parts. For part 1, there will be a staff presentation covering the proposed setback code amendments, followed by a public hearing, deliberation, and motion on the first ordinance. Part 2 will cover the remaining proposed amendments, followed by a public hearing, deliberation, and motion on the second ordinance. Please note for the record, any written comments submitted prior to agenda posting was included with the meeting packet. Any written comment received after the agenda posting but prior to the meeting was forwarded and provided to commissioners. We'll begin with part 1 in a staff presentation on the setback code amendments. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Tonight, we're going to continue our discussion on setback amendments to our commercial zoning code. Both myself, Tess Cooper, Senior Planner, and
Maeve Nevins Louter, and I'm a park planning park planning and development manager.
we're both going to be speaking with you tonight about this process and asking any question, answering any questions, and facilitating any further discussion. So the discussion overview for this evening, just so you know the outline, we're going to talk about what is the problem, what is the current code, why does it need to be changed, including these 4 important bullet points, the limitations to the existing code, the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, economic vitality for our downtown waterfront area, and agency coordination with important federal agencies. Thank you. You guys didn't catch that sooner. We did, we just. Thank you. Okay, there we go. Very good. So the what, the why, and the how. How would these changes apply? And we'll address some questions and concerns that we've had to date and move forward with some discussion of the topic. There we go. Technology is not my friend tonight. No, something's going. Absolutely. Okay, since we're going to be discussing quite a bit of meat and potatoes, some complex topics, I think what staff has decided is that if we get through it all, a lot of your questions and concerns that you have in your brain and you want to ask might actually be addressed through here. So what we're going to ask, instead of stopping through the presentation, we're going to flow through. Hopefully we'll answer all of your burning questions. And then at the end, we can move into a question and answer and discussion process. That should facilitate us through, since we have one additional topic and presentation to go through tonight. Facilitate the process. So the what area are we talking about? So the commercial zones are shown in orange and purple. There's a tiny little spot of white there, so we're going to ignore that. That's residential. But all along Sand Creek on both the west and the east shores in commercial A and commercial B zoning is the areas that we're talking about. The second part to the what are we talking about is this section of code. And you can see the current specifications in our zoning code title 9 under commercial zoning. Talks about building setbacks for commercial A, B, and C. And below the specific setbacks is a special setback standard from Sand Creek. And it specifies that structures along Sand Creek shall maintain a 25-foot vegetated setback from the high water mark of the creek, established at summer pool elevation of 2062. It has an exception for uncovered porches, decks that may encroach, and structures utilizing the encroachment shall be permeable and constructive erosion control materials. And so this is the section that we're identifying the problems. In this next section, we'll talk about what the problems are or the missing pieces in this and why it's important for us to really come back with a more comprehensive, detailed proposal for improving upon what is currently there. So the limitations of this code are, we have a distinction between buildings versus setbacks that is not addressed. It just says all structures. And through International Building Code and stream requirements, it's really important for us to differentiate the definitions between what a building is and what a structure are. There's some relevant and important recreational, public access, and water dependent uses that incorporate structures that obviously need to be on or near the water and within the 25-foot setback. The code lacks the flexibility to address site-specific conditions. In this downtown area, there's a lot of existing pavement and development as opposed to a vegetated buffer. And to be able to look at site-specific requirements and conditions, it's important for us to be able to add that in, especially with our other specific codes and links to stormwater management and FEMA and other agencies and other code-specific codes that are specifically not addressed here. There's jurisdictional issues, and you can see these two diagrams to the side, how I specified that it just says high water mark and talks about summer pool and the elevations. After inviting the agencies to review our proposed code language and discuss what the implications of that were, the Department of Idaho Land, or the Idaho Department of Lands, came back with a full discussion and meeting with them about really what the jurisdictional lines are, what the elevations are or aren't, and what the distinctions that we need to specify in this new code are. And so the major change is that there's two different high water marks. We have an artificial high water mark and we have an ordinary high water mark. And it's important that we only have jurisdiction to the applicable one of these, and beyond that waterward of those marks is Idaho lands. We do not have jurisdiction over what happens there. And you can see for the artificial high water mark is really the lake, any dam controlled water body, which is Lake Pond 8, has what we're familiar with, the summertime pool and the wintertime pool. They hold water back and then they release water as necessary. And so for Sand Creek, what we have is a backwater, lake backwater condition where the lake elevation controlled by the dam flows back into the channel. And so where that is, the discussion with Justin at Idaho Lands is what we consider the backwater portion of the lake is really not Sand Creek there. And so the applicable artificial high water mark is located at the elevation of 2062. And that was established at the time of, there's some language, the time of statehood.
There's some Supreme Court cases regarding that.
Yeah, the time of statehood.
Well, and I think we'll clarify just a bit there. There's really not been a clear delineation by the Idaho Department of Lands as that backwater flows into Sand Creek, where the lake ends and where the stream starts. And so you have an artificial high water mark jurisdictional designation as it relates to the lake, and you have an ordinary high water mark jurisdictional designation as it relates to the creek. But we don't know exactly and wouldn't know exactly without very detailed surveying of every individual parcel exactly where that line is. So the creation of this proposed code is in collaboration with the Idaho Department of Lands to help clarify and clean up some of these jurisdictional inconsistencies, some of the high watermark language inconsistencies, and to make our code more compatible with these other regulatory agencies that really have jurisdiction over the waterways, where we only have jurisdiction over the land use.
And that's where the flexibility comes into the need to determine on a parcel by parcel basis, which one of these applies at that location.
Correct.
And we absolutely have goals to do that detailed survey work so that we have a much better idea in the future for permitting process, the administration of this code. At this time, IDL and ourselves, we just don't have a whole lot. So it'll be on a project by project basis to identify, which is a very common process in other areas in water bodies where it's not just a standard elevation that's called out in code, because it is variable. So it's really important change for us to be able to adapt to here.
Do you mind if I interrupt for just a second? I know you wanted to get all the way through, but I think this is way more complicated than it needs to be. I think Justin from the IDL said it very clearly. The artificial high water mark is 2,062.5 feet. The ordinary high water mark is 2,051 feet. So my question is, the proposed amendment says where an artificial high water mark does not exist, buildings shall be set back a minimum of 25 feet from the ordinary high water mark. Do we know, yes or no, where artificial high water mark does not exist between Bridge Street and Cedar Street?
That's the detailed surveying, and that will be the project. Until we are able to do citywide our own surveying and get an idea of that, each project will have to survey those locations and show us where they are on their site plan.
So
that
is it possible that one property owner could argue that an artificial high water mark does not exist and then be able to build within 25 feet of the bottom of the creek, because that's the ordinary high water mark?
No, but it really is clear where there's lake backwaters and where it's a natural channel. That it's.
So the incorporation into the proposed new code of the collaboration and the cross-referencing with the other federal and state agencies is really key here. So our previous code didn't defer to them, right? And so that collaboration and cross-reference is going to be really key, because it would be the Department of Lands determining upon a case-by-case survey where that artificial high water mark applies and where it does not. It's not a landowner decision. It's not a city decision. It's a Department of Lands decision on a case-by-case application.
They'll distinguish where their jurisdiction is.
So why does the proposed amendment to code say this? Why not just say there's a 25-foot setback from artificial high water mark? And I know you said, well, there might not be an artificial high water
Because
mark. but we
artificial
know-
high water mark may not, likely will not be all the way up that entire zone.
The discussion with Justin is that it ends by the bridge to
By
the,
Popsicle Bridge.
by Popsicle Bridge. Thank you. So, and
Okay,
then there's.
so, but we know we're not talking about commercial B way up there, a mile up, 2 miles up Sand Creek. We're talking about the downtown waterfront.
we-
No, we're talking about all of.
I understand we are, but the development that we're all concerned with is commercial A between Bridge Street and Cedar Street. So is there an established artificial high water mark there? We just don't know.
We
Is that
just
what you're
don't
saying?
know.
We don't know.
We
So-
need to make sure that this code can accommodate any circumstance that comes up, and that's what it's designed to do.
So why the same setback for artificial versus ordinary? Why not a greater setback for ordinary? Because we know that if we do defer to the ordinary high water mark, that's going to be much further out into the creek. And that seems like a concern that I've heard from a lot of people, development out into the creek.
So because I kind of have a sneak peek into what's coming next, can we set that question aside and let these guys proceed
Mhm.
through the rest of the presentation? Because you might get a sufficient answer to that question throughout the presentation.
I hate to jump in, but is this a 25-foot horizontal or 25 feet of
It's
ground?
not a vertical, it's horizontal.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
And the last limitation is just that our code does not defer to and coordinate with the other agencies and the other jurisdictions. And I do think that this discussion, you'll see more visuals and more discussion. So 4 bullet points. limitations with our code, Parks Recreation Plan.
Thank you. So this next piece is really to introduce you to a specific area that will directly impact the city, and particularly these next upcoming years as we look to implement the Park Master Plan, which was just approved in 2020. And without this code revision, we wouldn't be able to realize what we're looking at here. So we're going to move forward through the presentation. As you may have recalled from a couple months ago when I was first here and introduced myself, I'm new to the area. I'm coming from Alaska, and so I have fresh eyes. So when I look at your waterfront and your green belt and all the potential from the drainages in the area, I see this as your front door. I see this as connecting the gems of the green belt. I see tremendous potential. The areas in green there are just approximate to show what this could look like when you talk about connection of the waterfront and how we can start to think from a bigger scale. And so when I put my planner hat and I start to make those connections happen, I'm seeing endless opportunity from a public access and a public lands perspective. Specifically for the implementation of the Park Master Plan concept for the Sand Creek downtown waterfront area, which is one of the concepts that was approved in the master plan. We are looking specifically at this one site, and this is a site that we're all very intimately familiar with, and it's also the site that I've spent the most time on along the creek in my last few weeks. And this is truly your gem, and this is also the same site where we're looking at revitalization continuing, and something that you're going to continue to hear a lot of enthusiasm for from the development community. This is the example concept plan that I'm choosing to focus on. This is the plan that was approved in the master plan, the Sand Creek downtown waterfront, and you can see how it's directly impacted by the code changes, and some of the development in there does overlay into the waterfront. This next slide is the same area just blown up, and the highlighted areas, they show the priority areas for development of the Park Master Plan. And you can start to see the picture come together, and to keep in mind that this is merely a concept. As the Parks Department develops this master plan and we take it from concept at the 300,000 scale bird's eye view, we will dive into the detailed design development, and we'll work hand in hand with the community through the public process, which will be an incredibly transparent and dynamic process that everyone will be engaged in. One thing that your community, or now my community, has a strong track record of is public process, and we are going to continue to build on that public process through this step. But you can see right off the bat, as you blow it up, you can start to see how we would start to be directly impacted with the potential to improve access, which was one of the driving priorities of the master plan. This is a visualization. Again, it's painting the same story, just in a different view. It shows how the 25-foot setback, again, this is an artist's interpretation, but an approximate 25-foot setback would be directly impacted by the master plan overlay. And you can see where my cursor is. I overlaid the concept master plan, and if the code wasn't changed and it was left as it currently is, we couldn't build any of the boardwalk or plaza features that are proposed in that approved concept plan. And again, I want to remind you that it is just a concept. So there, as we dive into design, we'll have ample opportunity to influence this design and its details. And that's something that I highly value, and that's something that I'm here to share my years of knowledge of working on waterfront projects with you, as far as a sustainability perspective, to the point where I'm brave enough to put in here innovative stormwater treatments as something to start thinking about. This is just a sample rendering of what it could look like if we did start to have a combination of innovative stormwater treatments, some sort of a vegetation buffer. All of a sudden now we're introducing inclusive access for people of all abilities and disabilities to the waterfront. Across the way on the east side, that is actually a pretty similar section of what the existing conditions are, where you do have a substantial buffer and then you have a trail corridor, all public gathering places. But to keep in mind that when we talk about the Sand Creek area, none of that is natural, and all of it has been disturbed historically. So what we're proposing here through the master plan and the park plan implementation is actually making this man-made area, or I should say man-destroyed area, just so much better as far as from a sustainability perspective. So we have incredible opportunities with this new code change. And I dare say that because when I'm talking to and what I'm referencing here is the stormwater runoff. And that's where the nitty-gritty engineering and the science and the design really gets technical. And this is where our opportunities are. This is where this is the meat and bones of the project. It's not in the plazas and the boardwalks. It's in what we can do underneath the soil, underneath the water even. So when I talk about stormwater runoff, I'm not just talking about the surface, but it does start at the surface. It starts on the rooftops. It starts with the pavement and what are we going to do there? And then we start asking ourselves, what are we going to do just below the surface? And what are we going to do even more so under the water? And how can these public assets, this park property, how can this treat the stormwater runoff in that area? This next slide is just a sample of other projects that are doing innovative stormwater treatments. These are just simply to give you little teasers of what's to come as I move forward with the project, the park master plan development. And you can see the slide on the left here. It looks like it's a tree just implanted into the plaza, but really if you look underneath that tree and underneath that plaza, there's a stormwater system under there that is filtering out the sediments and all the pollutants in the area. The second picture, that big box, is the typical stormwater treatment facility right up against a waterway. That's pretty typical. That's a very standard engineering way, but it's also cutting edge technology, believe it or not. So while it is our standard practices, that is this typical way that we start to see things. The next two slides on the far right, they're just samples of the layering and the ways that we can combine these more innovative drainage systems, stormwater treatment systems with different layers from, again, starting at the rooftop all the way down to the subsurface of the water. And I'm a huge proponent of working with the fish and game habitat restoration folks and working with the different agencies and seeing what kind of innovative technologies we can do. On the sample on the right, this is actually an award-winning project out of Chicago where they took the pilings that were the structural components and they have fish habitat plantings along there, and it creates the right environment to increase the fish habitat. This is an example of what it could potentially look like in those areas with the public waterfront gathering places. We're going to be revitalizing the community, but also activating, making it safer for all, making it safer for people with disabilities to be able to come here. The population of Americans who are becoming disabled, 1 in 4 of us will become disabled by the time we're a senior. And we want to be able to serve that population. And right now we have very limited access for people with disabilities to the waterfront. And some of these other pictures, you can see the third one over on the right, they actually have a floating wetlands. That floating wetlands is filtering the waters at a whole other level. So there's just different ways that we can integrate into the public gathering space these innovative stormwater treatment facilities. These are more examples of public access to water. I think the top left one with the boardwalk is very similar to what you have right now, particularly along the east side without the grade change, where you do have the vegetative buffer, you have that stark wall. I can imagine our wall along the east side being integrated into the art and historical plan in a much more creative way, and activating it perhaps with a playground or something that also has a filtration system underneath the surface. The picture on the lower right-hand corner, the very green lustrous one, that picture is really symbolic of what it could be ultimately if the ecology is brought to its vibrant life. This mixed-use waterfront development collage, it just shows the art of the possibility with the activation, the dining right up against the water, the evening lighting that could occur, not necessarily causing night sky influence, but more downcasting, and just adding an ambience that activates the site, and most importantly, activating it year round. I've heard from a lot of you and read in the plan that it's not activated in the winter, and imagine what we can do if we can develop that area. Of course, with the master plan and the concept comes additional recreation programming, which is another layer of development. A lot of what you've seen are pictures of the actual infrastructure, but this talks about, well, now how are we going to use it? How are we going to activate it? How are we going to get the vendors down there and really engage the community and our visitors with the waterfront? And this is just samples of what we can do. Maybe we have a theater down there. Maybe in the wintertime, there's ice skating. The art of the possible is endless right now, and it's a wonderful time to see this realized. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tess.
So bullet point number 3 is our downtown revitalization plan that we've been working on for over 20 years now. There is a focus point from the community to increase economic vitality in this area, as what we've just described as between Cedar Street Bridge and Bridge Street, and that whole downtown area, and reorienting and creating a focal point of the water, and having things completely facing direction, and adding more access and pedestrian accessibility and usability of this this asset, this natural asset that we have. And lastly, the 4th point in why we're doing this is the closely linked regulations from all of the other agencies. We have the Endangered Species Act, the Rivers and Harbor Act, the Clean Water Act, the Idaho Lake Protection Act, the Idaho Riverbed Administration Policy, Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act, and the bigger Water Flood Insurance Reform Act, with agencies, Idaho Department of Lands, the Idaho Water Resources, FEMA, and the Army Corps of Engineers, over and above ourselves. We need to work with these agencies and what all of these requirements are for this area. So how are we going to integrate these proposed changes? So let's look at the document together. So this is the current Orient Ordinance and the language that we plan on striking. We've looked at that. The new section, Title 9, Chapter 2, proposes these changes. A special standards for properties adjacent to Sand Creek. And again, this is within the entirety of the commercial code. I'm just going to point out what the language is, and you can see all of these marks back to our 4 bullet points of deficiencies in our current code, implementation of the Parks Master Plan, working with the revitalization plan, downtown revitalization plan and integrating our activities in coordination with other policies and agencies. So the first applicability statement is simply, these provisions are applicable to all properties along Fountain Creek within the commercial zones of this chapter. And we'll talk a little bit of why that is. I know that was part of your question. We'll get into more of why that is the entirety of the commercial zones, even though our focus and what has stemmed our interest in changing this is the parks plan and the downtown revitalization plan. We can see we've added new definitions to talk about the artificial high water mark, the distinction of what the downtown waterfront area is. And we add the ordinary high water mark back in. So artificial high water mark, as we discussed, is coming from the info of the deficiency in our code with the jurisdictional lines and the lake backwaters as opposed to the natural stream channel. Does anybody want me to go over in detail what these definitions are at the time, or do we kind of have a good concept?
I don't need it, thank you.
Okay. The next section maintains no change that buildings shall be set back 25 feet, which is our current setback. The only change here is that we're now adding the or from either the artificial high water mark or the ordinary high water mark, whichever is applicable on a site-by-site basis.
Did you want us to stop and address your question specifically?
Well,
right
that,
there?
that just raised another question, because it's not the only change. There's also the elimination of the vegetative setback, which seems like a pretty big change.
Yeah.
And now,
We can we'll address that a little bit further on as well.
But did you want to specifically address the artificial high water mark and the ordinary high water mark as it relates to the commercial zone?
I mean, I feel like I understand the difference between the two, but what I'm still not clear on is what is the scenario in which it might be determined that there is no artificial high water mark?
When you get far enough up Sand Creek that the Department of Land says that there isn't an artificial high water mark and therefore.
I
you have-
understand now. Thank you.
Hey.
So we're literally talking about where the stream flows somewhat naturally, even during summer.
Correct.
Okay, I've
It's
paddleboarded all the way to that point, so I know exactly where it is. But-
And I think the legal implication is that it's state ownership. The state owns the stream bed below ordinary high water mark. The state has exclusive jurisdiction for permitting below artificial high water mark.
So in the commercial A zone, south of Cedar Street, all the way to the highway off ramp, there's not going to be a circumstance where we are not able to establish the artificial high water mark. Would you say that that's the case?
I don't believe, I think it'll be artificial high water mark.
Okay, so
through
this
that
is
entire
not
area.
a concern that I should have, that there might be a situation in which a developer is able to build within 25 feet of the ordinary high water mark in that particular zone.
I think your questions are perfectly suited to flesh this all out and make sure everybody understands the difference and the jurisdictional issues.
But you're correct. The artificial high water mark extends far beyond what we're defining as the downtown waterfront.
Okay, that's,
Absolutely.
thank you.
And as you're saying, paddleboarding, it's very clear when you're on the water, what is, in the wintertime, where does the water go down and you can see the flats as opposed to where it stays the same
Right.
summer and winter. And that's going to be the distinction.
Okay,
But because we're addressing an entire zone, because we can't spot zone, we have to have, we have to address both ordinary high water and artificial high water because you're likely to have both of these in that zone.
John.
Well, I was just going to say in some of the discussion, it would be more clear, wouldn't it? Instead of saying average high water mark, saying an elevation of 2062.5. How am I wrong on that?
If you put a specific elevation, every time the state changes that, you're going to be amending your code. And it's not average high water mark, it's artificial high
That's what I
water
meant.
mark.
That's what I meant, artificial. But at least conceptually, that's what we're talking about is at this juncture.
At this
that
juncture,
elevation,
the
that
state
could
has
change, that
has
could
a,
change.
yes,
How many times have we seen it change?
I couldn't answer that.
Okay. So the next portion of this is the distinguishing of buildings as opposed to structures. So we say all buildings, well, I guess this is the distinction of the downtown waterfront. Even though we're not spot zoning, what we can say is that there's special performance standards that are required within the zone. So the downtown waterfront section as defined will require that any building be reviewed from the city to be consistent with the adopted planning documents, including measures that orient the buildings towards Sand Creek, improve water quality, and preserve public access to the waterfront, as well as adding elements of aesthetics, community character, vibrancy in it, and experience. The next section is where we have the distinction between buildings and structures. And so this is really an important deficiency that was there as well in the code that we are specifically focusing on fixing. And that will help us address the Parks Master Plan. But as Maeve's presentation showed, that the stream feature and environmental sustainability within our city, and even in the entirety of the commercial zone, who's to say we don't want to add additional stormwater treatment and infrastructure and public access and other amenities further upstream and still within our commercial zone, right? So to be able to divide these out and have that distinction within the code itself is going to be important as to what's a building and what structural elements can be allowed within the setback in and adjacent to the water for potential. Our goal is, sustainability purposes. So we divide out these structures. And they're listed so you can understand. So boardwalks, bridges, stormwater systems, walkways, and so forth. They may be constructed below the applicable high water mark as permitted by the federal and state regulations upon issuance of a conditional use permit. So this just means that in addition to IDL permits and Army Corps of Engineers permits, they will have to get a city permit as well so that we can make sure that all of those permits are talking together and coordinating conditions together and understand what all of the ramifications for this project mean. And then any of these structures may be constructed above the applicable high water mark within this setback, as long as they comply with the Sandpoint Stormwater Ordinance and protect or enhance water quality.
I have some questions about those 2 points. It seems a little vague to say that with a CUP, you could build below the artificial high water mark. But we don't specify how far below the high water mark. What could you speak to that?
That's a really good question. And again, we'll talk about this. So we took everybody's questions and concerns and we really added those into this presentation. So we're hoping we'll get there. It's not our jurisdiction. We can't tell people what they can and can't build there. But what we can do is add conditions to what other agencies are allowing them to build there. And again, we'll get more into that, but that's what that gives us, is the ability to coordinate with and be a party to those projects and add our own conditions, but it's not our jurisdiction to say that they can or can't.
Well, I find that a little confusing because currently we say they can't build any structures within 25 feet of
That's the
artificial high water
problem.
mark.
That's what we're
problematic.
fixing.
You're saying that
We can't say
we're
that.
open to litigation or something, like developers could
Yes.
sue the city because of our code.
Exactly.
So our code is currently illegal.
technically. And in defense of the code, and we spoke about this, and I think we'll probably talk about it a little more in the timeline. The comprehensive plan was adopted in 2009. This code section was adopted in 2010. I wasn't around then, but I would say, just based on my experience, it was probably a placeholder at the time, because then later you had the downtown revitalization plan. And then after that, of course, now we have the parks plan, the master parks plan. So my best guess would be this code was always intended to be a placeholder until it could be developed into a more comprehensive code section, and that's what's happening now.
No, that's why we're trying to help walk you through this and explain all of it and answer your questions and have these discussions, because it is complicated and there are sorts of layers and pieces and history and process.
So question on number 2 there, may be constructed above the artificial high water mark as permitted by Sandpoint Stormwater Ordinance to protect or enhance water quality. I don't really know what that means. If a building is built out to the 25-foot setback, but the developer wishes to build a impermeable, private patio with a roof over it right up to the artificial high water mark. It's not a building because it's not used for, we had a definition of building. It's not a habitat or whatever the definition was. So this can now be done with no CUP. Can you clarify that a little bit? We're going from 25-foot vegetated setback to any structure you want right up to the edge of the water, as long as it's not what's defined as a building. Or does that structure, is it required to protect or enhance water quality? See what I mean?
It is required.
But how does a developer prove that what they're building is for the purpose of enhancing or protecting water quality?
Through the stormwater ordinance and the stormwater permit.
Yeah,
But
Darren,
please, yeah.
chime in.
Yeah, I'm looking at section E here where you're referring to, and it says all structures except buildings such as bridges, boardwalks, stormwater systems, etc. And so the definition of building would include a deck or terrace off of the building. And clearly a deck or terrace is not meant to enhance water quality. This section is really meant to deal with those stormwater structures that need to be within the close proximity to the water.
Seems like the word only needs to be in here somewhere then. Maybe constructed above the applicable high water mark only to protect or enhance water quality. Is that what you mean?
Is that what it's intended to say?
Perhaps, I'm not sure where the commissioner was referring to adding the word.
Yeah, I think there's confusion in number 2 there, E2. So structures, could you scroll up just a little bit there, Tess?
All structures except buildings.
Yeah, so bridges, boardwalks, stormwater systems, plazas, walkways, access stairways and features, moorage facilities, stream stabilization, art features may be constructed above the applicable high water mark, which I think is supposed to say artificial high water mark, as permitted by Sandpoint Stormwater Ordinance. Should we have the word only to protect or enhance water quality? Because it doesn't make sense. It says you may build boardwalks, bridges, plazas, walkways, stairways, moorage facilities. You can build a dock out there. But are we trying to say that only if it enhances stormwater?
So no, and I don't think we want to, for lack of better words, pigeonhole ourselves into that. Because, I mean, there's other projects where you are doing, say, a shoreline stabilization project, and that's going to be considered in the water, but whatever back process, whatever stabilization or tieback is going to be out of the water, but it's not necessarily stormwater. But what it's saying is that you're still going to have to get a stormwater permit. It's going to have to meet our stormwater ordinance requirements. It's only going to be able to enhance water quality and meet those requirements. That it doesn't have to be just a stormwater enhancement project. There are going to be other items that are necessary to be within that setback between, but landward of the watermark. But those will be those will trigger stormwater and those will be overseen by, and they will have to meet the metrics of enhancing water quality, regardless of what they are. So even though Darren said that a covered patio for a restaurant, and so forth, that's going to meet the building requirements, and not be allowed in that setback, but that's also not going to meet the metrics of meeting those stormwater processes and balancing and enhancing water quality.
So are we saying that these bridges, plazas, walkways, moorage facilities, et cetera, as defined in capital letter E, and then under number 2, those kinds of things may be constructed above the applicable, the high water mark, if they protect or enhance water quality? And if they don't protect or enhance water quality, then they may not be constructed?
I think it's too difficult in a code to divide it out, to say these ones are going to be waterward, these ones are going to be landward, these ones are allowed here and these ones aren't there. Obviously, docks are not going to be in the setback, they're going to be in the water, they're going to be waterward. But this is just a summary of what we mean by those water dependent structures.
And they have to be compliant with the stormwater ordinance and code sections.
They will also, most likely, they will be in FEMA jurisdiction and have to be compliant with FEMA requirements.
And the IDL.
And IDL, there's going to still be in, potentially if they're, within the area of.
So we can't supersede FEMA or IDL or Army Corps of Engineers. So are they going to allow a building or some kind of structure that is impermeable to be built in this area that we're discussing anyway?
No, and that was part of our discussion, and let me go back to this presentation, especially FEMA. Because this is the very beginning discussion we had on this a few weeks back. We have the ordinary high water mark, and we have the artificial high water mark, and we have the setback. So through our code, we say that you could potentially start building buildings right here. But say we don't have our own particular cross-section with our own particular elevations, but potentially base flood elevation is all the way out here. And as we discussed, the base flood elevation is quite a bit higher than even the 2062 for FEMA, plus we add 1 foot freeboard to the base flood elevation. So for FEMA regulations, buildings can only be back here unless they are built above this elevation. But FEMA will not allow you to build structures over water structures or over water buildings, inhabited buildings over water. So it's really even more to your question, the other, yes, we can't supersede. So there's getting even more stringent requirements for buildings because it is a FEMA flood zone.
And this was one of the reasons to really clean up this code and give the credence to the other agencies and regulatory authorities. 1, we overreached into jurisdiction that's not ours. And 2, we need to require these applicants to comply with all these other state and federal agencies and regulations, which wasn't in the code, isn't currently in the code. So essentially with all of those requirements, the collaboration, the cross-referencing, the pulling our hands out from where we don't belong and giving the jurisdiction to the agencies that it does belong to, and then also adding the conditional use permit process, we belt and suspended the city's opportunity to have a say still in making sure that it's not completely out of our hands when there is a decision being made by one of these other jurisdictions.
And we're adding the stormwater option to it, or requirement, so that anything that's running off of these properties has to be managed in a way that's best practices or best management plan.
Technically, it's already there. Anything built currently right now, we have the stormwater ordinance and they have to comply, but it's just not linked in for us to say, oh yeah, wait, we have to do this as well, or for applicants to understand that that's going to be a requirement.
And right now we have none. Because like there's parking lots that are just flooding right into the Sand Creek is.
Existing
right off the
non-conforming development is a little bit different to what was built prior to our stormwater ordinance. And that's just the last point in this, is that F and G is exactly that. We shall notify all the other agencies, and city permits shall be issued with conditions that they meet all of those other regulations through all of those other acts, which include federal guidelines for erosion, sedimentation control, riparian areas, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and so forth. So these last F and G is truly just creating that necessary coordination with those regulations. I just added, just for the sake, the visual, just in case anybody really wanted it, the definition of the downtown waterfront. From this to this. But again, we'll talk about our authority and requirements about why it's not just being applied to this area alone.
I may be mistaken, but I thought I recalled from maybe the first time this was presented to us in early August, that it was only commercial A zone that was being proposed for this amendment. Is that correct? Was commercial B added later on? Was it always A and B, Amanda? Okay. Is that the end of your presentation, Tess?
No, sorry, I'm trying to find my way back to where I was. Thank you. Okay, yeah, perfect. So how? So, oh, this is your. Yes. Okay, so I'll let you talk. So we just want to give you a visual of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so now we're gonna dive into the recap of what can be done. So when you're looking at this graphic, this is the graphic version of what can be done. So you can see here how it interacts graphically. And then this gets into the details of it. Do you want to dive into there?
Nope. We can, I think we were gonna cover most of it. Yeah, so buildings with the 25-foot setback.
So that's,
Yeah, I'll let
we
you.
can, yeah, sorry.
No.
We can build buildings up to the 25-foot buffer or the applicable high water mark. We can build other structures on land. We can build other structures, not buildings, into the creek as permitted by the state and federal agencies. So this is reinforcing what was already said, and as a conditional through the city conditional use permit. So it's a series of checks and balances, really, is what we're saying. And then, just reiterating what the conditional use permit does. It's as you said, it was the belts and suspenders regulating the land uses by applying specific site-specific conditions. And that's important to note, that it's very site-specific. It changes throughout the whole corridor. It's a fine line on the type of conditions and authority per land use act. It's a very delicate balancing act in the private property rights with the public interest. And a good example would be, say something comes through our review process and the state permits a new dock. Everyone can imagine what a new dock might be. What we could do through this process is, with this code change, we could then say, we would like to see handrails added. We would like to see pedestrian lighting. We would like to see your material on your surfacing changed to maybe a light penetrating surface or something like that, that would increase that. So this gives us that flexibility to add in addition to what the state and the federal regulators have said.
But we can't say, you can't put in the new dock because the state said you can put in the new dock. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll go a little bit more into depth with our authority and limitations of that. So really the other part of the how is these are the solutions that we see, how we're going to get the solutions to our problems. And this is the result of that code that we just went through in detail by regulating the zone. And I think, Darren, you were going to add a little bit to these as well.
Thanks, Tess. Yeah, just to say that in terms of how we administer a zoning ordinance, we really want the setbacks to be included within the zoning standards. We would prefer to not have those kind of standards sprinkled elsewhere throughout the code. And Mr. Chairman, that's one reason why, just one minor reason why these regulations apply to all 3 commercial zones, because that's how the ordinance is structured. You can best think of a conditional use process as sort of an overlay or a blanket on top of whatever is existing on the ground. And the city's authority really lies in the land use realm. Is a land use appropriate or not in a given location? And certain land uses have certain aspects to them that are either controversial or they might have a deleterious effect on other land uses in the area, or there might be public interest that needs to be taken into account when you're looking at land uses. And hence the name conditional use. You then put conditions of approval on the operation of that land use to make them more compatible with other land uses in the area. So in this case, we're trying to balance out what private property rights with public interests. And the take home, I think, for the commission in this case is that buildings are allowed within 25 feet of the applicable artificial or ordinary high water, just as they are in today's ordinance, full stop. Buildings can't get any closer, but what can get closer and what can actually exist within the water itself is those water dependent uses that are regulated by the state and federal agencies. So I understand this is extremely confusing and it's difficult to write code for this, but in our estimation, this actually gives us more authority than what we have under the previous ordinance.
It adds the flexibility, and that was the next point, for those structures other than buildings. And by applying the stormwater ordinance or the BMPs, and so that really answers to the why is the vegetated buffer missing, because a lot of it is already unbuffered, unvegetated, and really the new stormwater ordinance and stormwater practices have even better performance and better technology than just a vegetated buffer. And does it actually make sense in some of these sections, site by site? I know commissioners and the public a lot of times have a hard time with adding flexibility into the code instead of really nailing down to the very specifics, only these. But it's really important that that flexibility is in there to really look at the site and say, this site has to have a cement cap on that, and it can't be vegetated for the safety of the structure and the shoreline armoring. And so but are there other ways and better technology that can be implemented that achieves what we wanted to with a vegetative buffer, but even better? So it gives us, for implementing the state best management practices and stormwater ordinance, and more and above just what a vegetative buffer is. It adds the correlation to those BMPs. It clearly deciphers our regulatory authority as opposed to other regulatory authority. And as we've talked about, a lot of these that we've already talked about, is it adds the conditional use permit process. And it mitigates the legal takings and discriminatory claims, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a second.
So as for that vegetative buffer, I think just for a point of clarification for the record, the word vegetative was removed, but the option to utilize a vegetative buffer was not. The option to use a vegetative in addition to other types of buffers was added and it was expanded.
Right, and the stormwater ordinance itself will require that and speak to that, that if this needs vegetation or is the most applicable to this site, then that's what will be required. Exactly. It just doesn't limit us to that, but will require it when it's necessary or prudent. So really kind of to summarize a little bit what Darren was talking on is the local land use policy act. This is what gives us the city's authority to create and police regulations. But it only gives us authority over land use. So we have to be very careful in what we're specifying. And it specifies in that land use, we have the ability to police and regulate comprehensive planning goals for our future, subdivisions within the state subdivision requirements, and zoning provisions. And that's it. That's where our police authority comes from in writing these. So it has to be zoning wide and zoning applicable. And so within that, we can write performance standards such as setbacks, allowed uses, conditional uses, and prohibited uses within that. But that's where our jurisdiction and our authority lies, is only within that. We can't spot zone, we have to apply it broadly within a zone. And then the very last line, whatever we enact has to be in character with and cannot conflict with all of the other general laws and regulations that we've talked about, state laws, other agency authority, and other acts and policies. Oop. And so we really want all of the concerns that have been brought up. We have 12 specific within our land use policy authority. And we want to really reassure you that this is what we've now implemented by all of those 4 points and fixing all of the deficiencies. We're now making our code more applicable to our mandated requirements to meet these, not only with our code, but with our project review and approvals. So we have to protect property rights. We cannot create regulations that are going to result in a regulatory taking. We have to ensure adequate public facilities and services. We have to, and I'm going to skip these again, there's a lot of them, but the highlighted ones, you can see how many of them apply to this code and our intentions with this code. We have to ensure that important environmental features of the state and localities are protected. We have to encourage urban and urban type development within the incorporated cities. We have to ensure that that development on land is commensurate with the physical characters of the land. So really, does it make sense within our already highly developed, concentrated downtown urban area to add all of these focus points and incentivize economic vitality, as opposed to, say, over in City Beach, where it's a natural area, or somewhere else. We want to concentrate this activities where it already is concentrated and not start it in a new area and create a sprawl situation. We have to protect fish and wildlife and recreational resources. And so anything that we write or any project that we approve will have to meet those requirements. We can't just waive it and say, this is going to be detrimental, but it's okay, we'll approve it anyways. And we also have to avoid undue water and air pollution. So I know most of these are what people's concerns are, that this is going to be an open invitation for that development. But I want to reassure you that our requirements mandated to us as the city by Idaho requires us to make sure that you're, as project proponents, meeting these, and that we're ensuring that there's an overall compliance with these requirements as well.
And this was also intended to show you how the proposed ordinance ties back to Idaho Code and the Land Use Planning Act, and pulls this code provision more in compliance with the requirements of the Land Use Planning Act.
And so these are the concerns, and I want to go a little bit into, so most of the comments, the public comments that we received, we've tried to summarize the overall arching themes that we've heard, both from your questions prior to this meeting and from the public. But one of them, I want to circle back to why you were asking why this is all of commercial A and B and not just the downtown waterfront, and specifically why we're allowing this on private property as well as public property is because of that property rights and the requirements to enact it widely and really
Not discriminate public versus private rights, but also as a commission, you are tasked with under the Local Land Use Planning Act to develop proposed ordinances or make recommendations and vet proposed ordinances to city council that do protect private property rights and that don't discriminate between private and public application.
and get ourselves into a regulatory takings situation. So I just want to go over these really quick to see if you have any more questions about them or if we really address them. Why not limit the change, the area between Cedar Street and Bridge Street? Why not apply to public property only? Why not require public access on private property? That's their property rights, we can't require. Why omit the vegetative buffer? We're just omitting the word vegetative. It doesn't mean that we're not utilizing vegetative buffers still as a tool. Why not require a public design review process? And this is just a public process to review all projects. There's some of those areas that aren't going to trigger an actual permit through us. It might not meet stormwater requirements and it might not meet a building permit requirement, but I encourage everybody to understand that, especially for IDL and Army Corps of Engineers, those ones that aren't necessarily going to trigger something through us for the public comment process, the hearing process, those agencies have those. And so by watching those public notices and those hearing dates, you have the ability for docks and marinas and so forth to have that public involvement process over and above what we have here at the city.
And the potential build out of the parks master plan will of course involve heavy public involvement going forward.
I think one minor tweak to your proposed amendment that would allay a lot of concerns that I've heard from the public is this. You've explained well why the vegetative buffer, that language could be removed, but we've inserted language that protects water quality because there are other ways to protect water quality besides a grassy slope, whatever might qualify as a vegetative buffer. But the requiring a CUP for any structures built inside that 25-foot setback would automatically allow for more public involvement in how the waterfront gets developed going forward. And I don't think we'd be infringing on property rights because we know that CUPs are generally approved, but it does give us, the commission and city council, the opportunity to hear these proposals because it is a huge change. And this is the number one thing I've heard from the public and talking to people in the last month is the elimination of vegetative buffer. So automatically, and the public doesn't understand what you described to us because that wasn't explained until today as clearly as it was. But what the public knows is that now all of a sudden private developers can build any of those named structures right up to the high water mark without going through any public hearing process, without getting any permit, conditional use permit from the city. I would feel more comfortable if we just change the language so that a CUP were required for any infringement on that 25-foot setback. And why can't we do that?
And that was a concern in most of our process. The city doesn't have a permit for us. We don't have a sidewalk permit. We technically don't have a building permit for a dock. So most of those activities, especially on the land, aren't going to trigger any, they're not big enough. So if it's a patio, a covered patio that's part of a building, that's gonna be part of their building process. So, but we're not talking about those type of structures here, I guess it's really hard to
I think what
get
he's,
the concept of, right,
you're asking for any application for a structure to be built within the 25-foot setback trigger some sort of a
Like-
public hearing.
Like it currently does. It currently requires a CUP to build, but you can only build up to within 15 feet of artificial high water mark. So that the dramatic change to code that's being proposed is really concerning to citizens. So I'm saying let's make it a little bit less dramatic by requiring a CUP as it is currently in code. Because, and I mean, yeah, now we're saying you don't have to stay 15 feet away. You can go right up to the artificial high water mark. But by taking that process out of the picture, it's a big concern to citizens.
so, and I think what I'm not articulating very well is that currently we don't have it structures. Currently, we have all buildings. Right? And
Well, it
so
does
a-
say permeable structures can be built to within 15 feet of the artificial high water mark with the CUP. So we're now saying impermeable structures can be built right up to the artificial high water mark without a CUP. I'm saying that's too dramatic of a change from the feedback I've gotten from the public.
So probably what we should do at this point, though, is close out this, just the staff report and move into public hearing. You can always come back to
Okay.
that concern in your deliberations.
Mhm. Yeah, that you've identified something you want to, yeah.
Are there any other general questions for the staff before we go into the public hearing? Okay. No?
Yeah, that's okay.
All right. Thank you. So we will now prepare to proceed with the public hearing on this topic. The public hearing is for comments only. Do not address any questions to the commissioners or to city staff. If commissioners have questions for the person testifying, they should ask those questions at the time of their testimony. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. The public hearing is now open. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak tonight? Mr. Holt, I would invite you to the dais first.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Steve Holt. I'm the Executive Director for the Lake Pend Oreille Waterkeeper. You know, we have seen a dramatic uptick in development, you know, throughout the county, and our office has been sort of inundated with a lot of violations, some specifically related to the vegetative buffer. So when this code came up, it was certainly something that we're interested in from a water quality perspective. And I just want to start off by, you know, thanking the staff and the mayor for sort of working with some of the organizations. The original draft of this, you know, proposed change had buildings all the way up to artificial high water mark. And since that's been revised to 25 feet. So we really appreciate that. I also appreciate Maeve's enthusiasm towards stormwater management and some of the slides that she had there. They're spot on. And I think that's really it. You know, we want to try to, and you're tasked with this, and it's obviously very complicated, right? But the goal would be to sort of enhance that, allow the city to do some waterfront development, but also enhance, you know, our stormwater management in that particular area. Contrary to, you know, some of the comments here, I look down there, I'm on the Cedar Street Bridge right now, my office is there, and I look down the shoreline and there's a lot of vegetative buffer still there. You know, Farm and Landing is full of it. You know, you go on the other side of Bridge Street, and there's all kinds of vegetation that's growing on the shoreline there. So I think that, you know, trying to do the best we can to accommodate all of these things. And I think, you know, Jason, you had sort of asked the question, and would the community be less concerned if there was additional oversight for what happened within the 25 feet? And I think resoundingly, the answer is yes. Currently, right now, regardless of the enthusiasm that we have towards the way this is written, a developer could technically come along, put his building within 25 feet, and then completely pave with a pervious surface and put a retaining wall all the way up to artificial high water mark. And they could also exclude the public from going through there. Now, I understand that there's this, you know, the public taking, and we can't really allow the public to access private property, but there are certain things that we can do to incentivize a developer to be able to go along with us. And one of those things, I believe, is putting, you know, an enormous amount of rules and regulations on that specific piece so that we get some negotiation leverage when it comes to allowing the public through there. And this whole not being able to impose a 25-foot vegetative buffer as some sort of a taking of somebody's personal property rights. I mean, we have a 40-foot vegetative buffer in the county right now that is actually lake wide.
Mr. Chairman, that is 3 minutes.
And that's my 3 minute. That went quickly.
Are there any questions for Mr. Holt before he returns to his seat?
I think I covered about 1/10 of what I wanted to, but that's good.
We did read your letter.
Okay, great.
Steve,
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Appreciate
Please and excuse, I did reread it this morning and the misspellings between pervious and previous
I saw
were,
that, I didn't judge, don't
definitely, got caught on the second. round.
Autocorrect.
Okay, Ms. Holland, I think you have some comments.
Hi, my name's Rebecca Holland. I served for many years on the Bike Ped Advisory Committee and chaired it for about 5. When the city purchased the farm and property, the full purpose of it presented to us was to protect the creek and to build swells and such. It was also at that same time too created as a designated bike lane, which is never, the signage is down there and it is US Bike Route number 10, but it's being ignored. That is a problem. To me, the whole area, when we talk about vegetation, I've been sitting here looking at this photo and there is vegetation around the water. It needs to be there. That's what helps protect it and have natural filtration. The concept of that whole little area being turned into a commercial zone. I've been here almost 50 years. I'll tell you, there's not a whole lot of people that have been here that really want to see that happen. Sure, it can be, made to be more accessible for as a park area for people. But the concept of the commercial businesses and turning the front there and making all that, that's not what the locals want. And we don't want to be another Aspen. We don't want to be a Jackson Hole. We don't want to get priced out of our homes, taxed out of our homes. And all of that is is getting built up and we know it. I mean, it's not rocket science to follow the trend. So I think a lot of what I was hearing, it's like, it's just belaboring things that don't need to be labored. And if the city has money to spend, let's take care of, let's take care of Cedar Street. Let's take care of a lot of things. And quit with just the concentration that's going on downtown. Some cities are calling for moratoriums with this whole deal. And I think that's where, the Sandpoint needs to go. We have so many good restaurants. We have so many good bars. We don't need more down there. And it's unfortunate that at this particular point, I wish there was a way that we could put a safe route through this town that gets our kids and our seniors and our people around. That's not happening and that's ignored. And it's unfortunate that that's not even one of the priorities that the city turns to. There's all these other things. And,
Mrs. Holland, your time is up, so I have to
It
stop you.
is?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Sorry, I was going to be
I got the
told
signal.
there.
I got the stink eye.
You got the idea.
Thank you, Rebecca. Is there any other members of the public who would like to comment tonight? Yes, please introduce yourself.
Yes, Clay Hutchison. I live in Sandpoint, and a dizzying amount of information presented. Well done. Some very pointed questions and comments by you that help to focus on it. I think everybody does want to protect the water. That's not an issue here. And we are talking about in this code change a fairly small amount of commercial property that we're talking. We're not talking about extending, crazy amount of lakefront and stuff like that. It's really fairly small handful of properties. And I think the objective that I am hearing is a way to use some of the more modern stormwater techniques so that you can do the water protection that we all crave, but also integrate some of the more pedestrian and public friendly aspects to the waterfront, such as the, right now we do want to increase pedestrian pathways along that, but without my understanding from listening to this, without some code changes, you won't actually be able to create those pathways. And walking on a steep bank is not a public pathway that is safe for anybody. So you want to mitigate, the stormwater thing, but you want to be allow the development to go on along those properties that can serve the needs that we all want. And I think that there's, a need to have some codes that make sense, that are not in conflict. As a developer, having codes that are in conflict between one agency and another is the biggest nightmare you can have. And so simplicity in these, in an aspect that is not simple at all, but striving for some simplicity is a good objective. And it seems like this is a step in that direction without taking away what we have, the protections that are in place. The big one, the setback, the building setback, the 25-foot, that hasn't changed. And so what this codes are asking to do is some greater flexibility in being able to enhance that 25-foot area. And it seems that the water protections are in place. And fortunately, we do have a public process, even though there may be sounds like there may be some loopholes in that, but there's still always the ability for the public to make their objections known when any of these projects are doing. There's plenty of opportunity for that. And we need that because that's important to make sure that balance is maintained. But this code revision seems to really help, a good step to simplify the things. And I think that's an important thing to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
there's a member of the public online. I just want to check in to see if he was interested in testifying.
Is the person participating via Zoom interested in testifying tonight?
There is no hand raised, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Would anybody else in the chamber like to testify tonight? No? Okay.
We get to go twice.
You got to go put on some different glasses and change your hat or something.
ID right here.
Sorry. Okay. That is the end of the public hearing. At this time, the commission will deliberate. Questions may be directed to city staff during deliberation. The staff report includes suggested motions. And they are also stated on page 8.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may clarify the
Yeah.
suggested motions. So if you intend to make a motion to recommend approval as written to City Council, there is a motion for recommending approval. If you plan to, or if somebody would like to make a motion to recommend denial, it's as written in its entirety as presented tonight. If you have suggested changes and would like to make a motion or a suggestion that the proposed ordinance be revised, my recommendation is that there be a motion to postpone the deliberations and recommendation to a date certain and discuss the proposed changes to the zoning ordinance with staff so that staff can bring forward a revised and complete proposed ordinance. Again, those revisions should not be made on the fly tonight.
Gotcha. Thanks. Okay.
I have a question, I guess, to staff, and that would mainly be one of the great concerns has been for water quality. Is there a way, when we were looking at that part E.2, where it said to protect and enhance, which would mean to protect the status quo or perhaps make it better, could that be changed to where we eliminate the protect and either have only enhance or change it to improve, so that any kind of development that were to happen would actually have to have a positive impact on water quality, not a negative impact. And I would be thinking that such ways when we think of a lot of that area down there that currently is paved, that's come up in some of the questions. One of those things could be that, again, not knowing legally all the things that can be done, But if a proposal came forward that now has less pavement, that is something that's enhancing or improving water quality. I mean, that's a small word change, but it might have some enforcement ability.
So
to
I
actually
just want to make
improve water
sure
Quality.
I understand. You are in subsection or section E subsection
2.2, yeah.
2.2. And so where it says as permitted by the Sandpoint Stormwater Ordinance to protect or enhance water quality, that language to you is not sufficient.
Well, to me, it sounds like that's sufficient to the public, that the public wants to see water quality improved, not just maintain the status quo. Is that something that can be codified? I'm just asking.
You have a stormwater ordinance that already speaks to that.
Yeah, but
And that's why I said if there's going to be a suggested, any
Yep.
suggested amendments, this is going to have to go back to staff for
Correct.
vetting with all of those other
Yep.
ordinances and codes. Because we don't want to create an inconsistency.
no, I understand entirely. Certainly it has to be done properly, but I'm just thinking that's something that would alleviate the fears of some of the citizens who think that it will have a negative impact on water quality. Because it's a huge opportunity to improve water quality, quite honestly, by some of the more modern structures, as well as a reduction in the amount of impervious surfaces that are there. It could be a huge improvement.
Right.
I have another question. I just noticed one of the other public comments that was in opposition was from a business owner down there concerned that, and I think that was less with the code and more to do with the park plan, that it somehow was going to limit access to her business.
Yeah, I recall reading that in the comments and maybe they didn't understand.
That's less a code thing though, isn't it? And more of a park plan thing? Yeah.
To speak to the park plan, there's going to be ample opportunities at the
Public.
design development phase for public comment at that point and participation in the design as well. So I'm not positive of her exact business, but I do recall that comment and she was concerned about access specifically and changing what was there. So yeah, I think all of that would be, addressed through that process.
And well, this isn't a code change thing as much as, but when we look at some of those kinds of stormwater improvements that could be made in that area, would any of this come under, we talk about we don't have enough money to fix Cedar Street. How are we going to find money to do all this? Is there mitigation funding available for some of this through BPA?
Potentially, I think that there's opportunities from working with local business owners. There's opportunities at the federal and the state level. The Great America Recovery Act has opportunities right now. The time to implement the master plan is prime for right now for all of the opportunities out there. You can leverage a $10,000 fish and habitat grant at the state level, and then you can leverage that with 40 volunteers, and next thing you know, you could have an entire stream bank restored 100 feet. So I mean, I've seen tremendous successes with small grants like that, and this just opens up the door and enables those opportunities. Right now, where it stands, I can't even apply for those grants. Right. So until we're allowed to do this, we cannot implement this portion of the plan. So.
I think I still need some clarification on, we seem to have removed some protective language. Yeah, tell me if I understand this correctly, because we don't need it because the state or the Corps or some other governing body provides it. So especially on the water side of the
Artificial.
Thank you. Artificial high water mark, that those structures, is it for us to approve or disapprove them? Or can only some other governing body approve or disapprove those?
Only the other governing bodies, but we will be able to be a party at the table for those
With
approvals.
the CUP. So the CUP that you were concerned about is for the 25 feet
Within
to the
25 foot.
landward side of that. Okay. That makes sense. And then you refer to the stormwater ordinance that protects us from having structures that do not adequately deal with stormwater. Is that the city ordinance?
Correct. And then Tess also spoke to FEMA's jurisdiction within that floodplain as it applies in that area as well.
Okay. So if we were to want to, we remove the CUP for the 15 feet landward of the,
Artificial.
thank you,
high
high water mark. And you're suggesting that we put the CUP back, not just for the 15, but for the whole 25. Is that correct?
That's, I believe that that would be preferred by the public because it does provide another layer of public oversight and allows us to assure that we impose conditions on what gets built within that 25-foot
Mhm.
setback. And we therefore have the opportunity to require that it not only, well, that it at the bare minimum protects water quality, possibly enhances it.
Given the language that we have now, do we have any say in what's built in that setback or only that it has
Just
to
not
protect
building
water quality?
structures,
And it can't be
building.
a building, but it can be a structure.
Cannot be a building structure that has to be compliant with your stormwater management ordinance.
But otherwise, we have no jurisdiction over it as the code is currently, I mean, we can't,
Unless it's something that would trigger.
No, I think what your real
Yeah.
question is do you have the opportunity for it to come before you before it gets approved rather than administratively approved?
right, okay,
And I think that's what Chairman Welker is speaking to
okay.
is implementing a change to the proposed ordinance to trigger public hearing or public involvement at any application within that 25-foot setback.
And if we were to want that change, is that the kind of thing where we would have to recommend postponement?
Yes.
Okay.
A thought that just came to me about the loss and the gain and the stormwater and within the 25-foot setback. It might be worth mentioning at this point. I showed you the diagram of how far FEMA's. So even though we have only to the high water mark is Idaho Department of Lands. And then, Army Corps of Engineers, but FEMA reaches the highest jurisdiction all the way up there. And within those, I do think it's really important to note and coming down the pike. So this isn't current, so really it's not applicable, but in the very, very near future, all of the FEMA flood zone requirements through our flood development permits are going to trigger ESA, endangered species, review and mitigation and protections for those currently vegetated surfaces and so forth. And so anything all the way beyond our 25-foot setback that is in that FEMA flood zone is going to trigger ESA review and very, very, believe me, very strict requirements.
I can see how that would cover environmental concerns, but I'm just wondering about what we want there as a city. And it seems to me possible you could build a structure. It's a structure we can have there, right? Not a building. You could build a structure there that protects fish and wildlife and adequately drains stormwater, but it's really ugly and nobody likes it. Or so you're saying, no, that's not possible. And are you saying that's because of it's all gonna be part of that park plan that we're all gonna have a chance to review maybe?
The park plan is going to be, a chunk of it, and wherever the concepts had touched that area, but it sets the precedent for some of that innovative treatment. And because we have to adhere to so many strict regulations at the state and federal level, it's going to force us to have a innovative solution. It's as simple as that.
I don't question that, but I wonder, even if we all have plenty of public input to the waterfront plan that you described,
Yes.
what about, further up the creek? What if someone finds an environmentally friendly way to put a hot rod track in there. Do we have no say in whether that hot rod track is put there as long as it is meets all these requirements?
You are squarely dancing into that balancing act between managing appropriately and not negatively affecting private property rights.
Right, okay.
And I swear
And-
this
and I
said
will-
something about aesthetics in here.
It said something about. And I will remind you that is one of your charges in the Local Land Use Planning Act is to protect private property rights.
We know
In
that-
addition to balancing with the obligation.
I mean,
regarding the
we
city.
get dragged in here when somebody wants to put a food truck in their parking lot.
You're right.
Okay, you need a
Yeah.
CUP to sell barbecued ribs on Cedar Street. So that it's not that much to ask that a developer who wants to build a private patio impervious surface out to the creek to require them to come make their argument in front of the people of Sandpoint. That's all I'm saying.
So I
So
think that proves that we don't need to have that hearing about the food truck.
Which
They're not
speaks
even
to
there.
other code amendments that are not before you tonight.
I have a question too, if you were done with that, right? That train of thought, because it's a totally different train of thought. When we say that FEMA would not allow them to build within some of that flood zone, is that FEMA would not allow them to build, or FEMA would not give them insurance? If you had a deep pocketed developer who wanted to build there anyway, and he said, I don't need insurance, I'll cover my losses.
That removes insurance from the entire city, not just that property owner and that structure. So
Well, that's not
we
gonna
are, as a city, we administer the insurance program, and to be in compliance with that means that we are making sure that everything that is built meets their requirements.
I know in some of the coastal zones that are getting repeatedly flooded now, FEMA can't stop them from rebuilding because that would be taking private property, but they can say, you're on your own.
Yep, and that truly is a good point, is that anything that is potentially going to displace flood waters or affect the change, even though we don't have the, so you're right, that's going to trigger review and requirements through FEMA. So you're asking what public process is there? And I'm not sure how much, I guess we're still doing the flood development permits through the city, but anything that, even though it's not a structure, it potentially is, if it's going to affect flood
Right.
processes, then we're going to have to make sure that it meets their requirements. But maybe potentially, I thought it said something about aesthetics, but no, what do we say? H, to ensure the development on the land is commensurate with the physical characters of the land. So it kind of speaks to your
From that
concern.
perspective, yeah.
so no race car track.
No race car
Exactly.
track.
Not likely.
But it is up to us to ensure that a race car track is not built. Is that what that's what this?
That is our
says?
responsibility given to the state.
Right.
Exactly. This is the city's responsibility to make sure that what we're approving meets all of those 12 standards.
Well, pursuant to that, then I think I am ready to move to postpone. So we can consider a CUP for that whole 25 feet.
And perhaps language to enhance water quality, not just protect.
So I move the Planning and Zoning Commission postpone the deliberations and recommendation to a date certain and discuss the proposed changes to the zoning ordinance Z021-01 period A with staff in more detail.
Commissioner, and very specifically in that motion, you would like staff to consider the CUP process within the 25-foot setback and the enhancement of water quality, and then the consideration of vegetative language again.
I'm not saying the vegetative thing.
I just want you to be really specific. I need staff to know exactly what you'd like them to consider for inclusion.
I'm okay without vegetatively.
I
Thank you.
am too. I think that was explained quite
Very
well, that
reassuring
there's
about
better
that.
ways to filter water than a
I
grassy
think the
slope.
definition, I mean, we're thinking of the plants gonna do their thing, but some of these built structures will probably have bios in them, and they will do a better job than if it was just plants on the surface.
Thank you.
Would anybody like to second Kate's motion?
I would second that.
Okay, roll call vote.
Commissioner Riggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Hastings,
Aye.
Commissioner Welker,
Aye.
Commissioner Dunkel,
Nay.
Commissioner Hughesman. Aye.
Okay, so the motion to postpone a decision has been approved. And we will now move on to part 2.
To date
Do we have
certain.
to identify
Sorry,
a date?
do we
certain?
determine a date?
Yes, let's,
2 weeks from now?
our next meeting, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so that would be September 21st. Okay, I would like to request we take a 5-minute break. And that Amanda unlocks the bathrooms, please. Thank you. Oh, we have one more. It's the. Okay, we are back, and I believe.
Yes,
Commissioner
it's
Hastings is gonna make
kind
a
of
motion.
come to our attention that the 2 parts, part 1 and 2 of item 6B on the agenda this evening are so tightly intertwined that with our decision to postpone a decision on part 1, we need to, I would make a motion that we would move our discussions of part 2 of that to the next meeting when we're also discussing part 1.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay. I believe that means that this meeting is adjourned and we will be back on September 21st. Thank you.